Hi, Kerri.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Just trying to get organized here. We'll just let everybody in one at a time, and once we
Sure.
have the committee, then we'll move forward if that's okay with you.
That's great.
Okay. Mariana, can you remind me which application the Mullins are involved in? Is it 6-1, 6-2, or 6-3?
Sorry, the Mullins?
Yep.
That's the demolition? The third one?
Okay, 6-3? Okay. They're
Oh,
just in,
sorry, I didn't, yeah, you were referring to the item number. Sorry, I don't have the agenda right up.
oh, okay. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
they're just in the waiting room, and I just don't want to bring them in to sit through the whole thing. So, okay.
Yeah. That would be the last one, I believe.
Okay. And then I'm assuming I have Bill waiting. He's on the first one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you wanted to move that last one up so that they're not waiting, because there's probably going to be a lot more discussion about the other ones. I don't know if you want to get a sense from the committee if there are any concerns, and then if there are, we could leave it the way it is, or if there are no concerns, we could deal with that one first. 'Cause that,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, then,
I didn't hear I didn't hear from any preliminary comments that there were any concerns about that one in terms of its demolition. It's just a listed property.
okay. Well, when we do confirmation of the agenda, then if the committee so wishes to bring that item up, if it's one that's not going to take long in the interests of expediting it, then they so
Sure.
can do that. Yep.
And I know that Councillor Van Leeuwen has to leave after about 45 minutes, he said, so that way we could also hopefully deal with more items that way. I don't know.
Okay. Oh, I think we have somebody else coming in right now. Let me just see. I apologize. I'm not as familiar with the committee members' names. I'm struggling just a little bit to see who's
the new member there. Kerri is for 6.1 as well.
the Susan. Okay.
Yeah, there should be 2 on that one.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because we only have four committee members. Did we have any regrets from anybody by any chance? No.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Devlin, do you want to send out a quick, just a quick notification to everybody in case they're just off doing something else? Perhaps with a link to the meeting? Do we need one more for quorum? Yeah, okay.
Okay, I think we've got a few more coming in now. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think we have quorum and everyone is in that appears to be with us at this time.
Okay. And we can welcome everyone to, I think, perhaps we're making history here again in Center Wellington with the first electronic Zoom meeting of the Center Wellington Heritage Committee. So thank you everybody for being here, taking time out of your afternoon in the summer. So calling the meeting to order with the disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Does anyone have any conflicts? And if not, then by consensus, we can move on to confirmation of the agenda. And is there any concerns or additions? Go ahead, Jean. I think you need to unmute. Unmute.
Yeah, is that better?
Yep.
Yeah, can we add the council meeting of June 29 to the agenda?
Okay, do you want to be more specific, or are we going to talk about the whole meeting?
Well, as it relates to the Heritage Committee.
Okay, so you wanted to talk in terms of the bridge designation,
Yeah, to debrief.
to debrief on that?
Mhm.
Okay, are there any questions with that or concerns with that? Is everybody in favor of that being added at we could add that at the end of the meeting as a information item? Okay, if you want to just indicate whether you're in favor of that, or, yep, just with a hand up, that's good. Okay, so I think we have consensus then that we can add that item to the end of the meeting as an information discussion. And then approval of the minutes. Heritage Center Wellington from March 10th. Any concerns? Okay, then by consensus, the minutes are also approved. And that brings us to action item, new business 6.1. Heritage permit application for 169 Victoria Crescent, Elora, designated heritage property. And I guess, are we going to start?
Sorry,
Yep.
Phil.
Go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. We just had the brief discussion before about if the committee decided to discuss these item 6.3 first. If there weren't any significant concerns or objections, then we could get that one out of the way, as I know the applicants are waiting.
Okay, is everybody, go ahead, Kerri.
Yeah, originally I think that was a good idea, but now all the applicants are waiting, so we're not really expediting anything for anyone. We're holding everyone up equally. So I think if we go in order,
Okay.
that would be fine. Yeah, everybody's joined. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I will bring in Mr. Walinga before we go any further.
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Okay,
Bring
give
him
me
up.
just give me a second here.
And Mariana, just, do you just want to review what the heritage permit application is for this site is about?
Sure, I'll do that once they join.
All right. And does Bill Wayminga have anything else he's going to say? You know?
He did wish to speak, yes,
Okay, so we can let him do that first.
sure.
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to look over the information?
Kerri is, I think there was another person on that, Suzanne, you said she was,
Maybe they're on the same camera. There we go.
I have no idea why I'm not on the screen.
We can hear you, Bill.
Okay. My wife's coming to help me. Hi, Phil. How are you doing?
Good. Good. So everyone's here. So can you see the committee?
I can see three.
Okay.
Kerri, Nancy, Mariana, and Phil.
All right.
Well, okay.
Here, we'll trade computers. You do audio, I'll do visual.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
There you go. Hi, Bill.
Here we go. Okay. Do you have questions for me?
Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to add to your to the information that the committee has? Just unmute. Susan, he needs to unmute.
Hang on.
There you go.
All right. Okay. How's that?
That's good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So in response to the last email, it will definitely not have any elaborate brickwork on it. I want to keep it very simple. On my research, as far as architectural, no one copies the house. Like if it's a Georgian house, there's a style for carriage houses, which are simple, tiny bit of Victorian, but not much, but they're just very simple brick buildings. So I'm sort of copying different houses in England, carriage houses in England.
Okay. So just bear with me here. I just want to get some guidance from Mariana, if possible, on this. Mariana, do you suggest then that we would go around and have some input at this point from various?
Well, so if you'd like, I can just do a brief review of the application for the benefit of the public, anyone else watching.
Sure.
And the committee.
Okay.
So this is the property at 169 Victoria Crescent. I think it was formerly addressed as 14 Henderson Street. And it's the former church manse. The house itself still stands. So, and then this shed is being proposed. There's a shed at the rear of the property that's being proposed to be demolished due to poor condition, and that the owners would like to install a residential apartment above. So, and it would be for family to reside in for now. So the application is the property is designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. The bylaw has been circulated to the committee and has significance in all three values. The shed is proposed to be demolished, and my understanding is it was constructed from the stones from the former church foundation. but mostly rubble stone. So it is, I know it's been in poor condition. You've seen the photographs in terms of the structure, and the owner can speak to that if you have further questions in that regard. But it's very difficult to try to stabilize this building and to construct an apartment above it. So that's the reason for the demolition request. And then the committee should be looking at the bylaw in terms of its heritage value of the property. And the shed itself is mentioned in the bylaw as being part or included in the designation. And I know in the letter that was attached and in our discussion, my discussion previously with Bill, the owner, that I know he had gone to the Heritage Committee back in, I think it was 2013, regarding a similar application to remove the shed and construct an apartment above. And there was some discussion, so I just need to clarify this bit for the committee. There was some discussion then about, and the owner referenced de-designation. What the discussion was that the committee didn't object at that time to removal of the shed, but the bylaw itself was never updated. And when you have designation of a property under the Heritage Act, it's the entire property that's designated. It's registered on the title of the property. And then the bylaw itself outlines what is significant about it, which structures are included and why, and what the heritage attributes are. So that bylaw is with the committee for your review. And so the question today is whether the shed should be permitted to be demolished. And then if so, how the new construction should occur. And there would be also a heritage permit for the new construction because it's designated. And if the committee agrees that it is in keeping and that the shed can be demolished, then the committee can make that decision. It does need to go to council because it is a designated heritage property. So it does require a heritage permit approval process, and council does need to approve that because it's visible from the street, and it's also a demolition of a portion of that property. So I hope that outlines the application in itself and enough. And if there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And then I guess the committee can also discuss.
Okay, I just had one question in terms of the process you outlined, Mariana. Is there actually a two-part, a demolition permit and a heritage permit to build?
No, it all falls under the one permit. So it's just an alteration and demolition to the property. So it would go to council once, basically, in one application.
Okay.
But it is two parts, right? So obviously, if the committee doesn't agree with demolition, the second part wouldn't proceed.
Okay, well, in that case, recognize Jean. Unmute.
Yeah, I think you have to unmute me. I can't unmute. Anyway, a question for Mariana. Council, this is a heritage designation. Am I right in thinking that only council can approve either an amendment to or a repeal of the heritage designation? There's no de-designation in the Ontario Heritage Act. So am I right in saying that only council can do this?
That's right. Only council can make that decision on either repealing the bylaw or amending the bylaw. So what would happen in this case is that if this happens, then we would have to, as a second part, we'd have to update the bylaw to say that this building has been removed and reconstructed. But that amendment to the bylaw can come afterwards.
So what are we being asked to do today?
So council makes the decision, but the Heritage Committee must make the recommendation. A council must consult with its Heritage Committee before making a decision. So the Heritage Committee's recommendation on this will go to council as part of their decision making.
Okay, I understand. Okay.
Okay, so perhaps,
Excuse me. Can you
go
hear
ahead,
me?
Nick.
Oh, good.
Yep.
The bylaw came into effect in 1996. Has there been any effort since 1996 to do any kind of refurbishing on the structure, or any kind of upkeep, that kind of thing? The other thing that I wanted to know is does the owner actually live in the main house, or has it been turned into rental units? Maybe I can get some clarification on those 2 points.
Okay, that's a question for Bill. And Bill, just unmute your speaker, please, up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen.
Okay.
You're muted again.
Okay, how's that?
There you go.
All right.
So the question is, have you done any upkeep
Yes.
on the shed? And also the other question is, what is the nature of the property, the home?
Okay. I live in the house with my family, my wife, and we constantly restore the house. The house is in great shape. The shed, we haven't done any work on because it's poor bones and it would cost a fortune. It's just a money pit. It's just, everything's cracked. So no, I haven't done anything on the shed.
Yeah, and you did approach, you made a request in 2013, I believe, to have it designated, which we know isn't a thing, but you, at that time, did take that action.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions then for Bill on this?
I'm sorry, are we asked to vote in 2 parts? One is the demolition and the other is, are we looking at them in tandem, or?
I think what we're,
Because I think we should look at each as its own, with its own merit.
that's fair enough. So we're discussing primarily right now the demolition, and the consequences of that would be that, go ahead, Marianne.
Could I, maybe for the benefit of the committee, there was some discussion about materials, and the committee wanted some clarification on materials that were going to be used. So maybe if Bill could refer to that a little bit and just explain, you discussed brick and why you chose or are choosing brick and what it might look like and where you would obtain that. So I wonder if that might help the committee as well.
Yeah, I think, thank you. I'm sort of a little disoriented here because the nature of this meeting, getting used to it. Normally we'd have you speak, Bill, and people would ask you questions, and then we'd discuss the merits of that after. So following that same format, yeah, do you want to fill us in then on the materials
Sure.
and so on? Yeah.
Sure. As a lot of people don't know on the committee, I work on heritage houses. So I do all kinds of exterior, interiors. I've noticed that the pine or the exterior board and batten is short-sighted. Like it doesn't last a long time as the new stuff, the ponderosa pine. I like brick because there's 1,000 different styles you can get, and there's a lot of vintage brick that look old. So my preference is new, old-looking brick that's tumbled, and then we could get a very good color, close to in keeping with the houses around here. And for maintenance, for long-term, it's a better product. That's all for the brick, as opposed to board and batten. And then the windows will probably be wood.
I think at this point, there's probably going to be some questions about the overall look of it and the details, or I would think that those questions would follow from this, but that information might not be available to you or to us yet. So,
and there's more to that too, Phil. I don't know how the proposed structure fits contextually within the whole of the property. I don't know how it fits in scale with the house. And so I'd really like to get some idea in terms of, how the garage, because it's a fairly significant mass, how it would fit in conjunction with the house.
Oh, okay, so the house is 34 feet tall to the midspan of the rafters. The garage is 20 feet tall, so it's definitely shorter. The tricky part is that if you have a garage, a 10-foot ceiling height is a good height. I wouldn't go lower. And the problem about the height is the lower I go, the wider I have to go, because it's a story and a half, and I get into real trouble around the elevator, and I have to go wider to accommodate. So to keep the footprint low, I have to go up a tiny bit. It's in the back corner of the property. The property is 1/3 of an acre, so it's definitely the main house will show its hierarchy.
May I say something here? So I also want to put the size of the garage in context, that we are beside the old Chalmers church. The garage will actually be as close to the church as it is to our home, which is an enormous building. And so, our understanding was, and the reason that we instigated this application process, is that we were told that the township is actually encouraging two things. One, auxiliary properties, so my mother-in-law, Bill's mom, can move in. So auxiliary properties and accessible properties. And so while we tried our best to keep the height of the building within, the bylaw or whatever the rules are, that we had to go up, I think it's just a few feet, Bill, in order to accommodate the accessory building, accommodate the accessibility of the building, which is why we had gone with that design.
Are we able to get any drawings that would put the two side by side so that we can get some visual image as to what this is going to look like?
Well, I could speak to that, and it's interesting because Bill was talking about some of the questions that were coming up, and the order in which we're doing these things is interesting to me, because we're certainly not going to invest a ton in design and renderings. Like, we have our footprint and we have the idea until we know that we're going to be able to get a permit. And so, the person that we did have design it does have an older CAD program. Could we come up with some rendering? Yeah, we probably could to some expense. But we want to know that it's a process that will be moving forward before we invest too heavily in that. Sorry, maybe I'm speaking out of turn. Maybe
Nope, not at all. Thank you. You and Bill have the floor right now in terms of questions.
Thank you.
Can I add a little bit in terms of process there, Phil?
Sure, go ahead.
So it's useful, I think, now to just note that we talked about the height. So the current height limit is 14.8 feet in the township for an accessory building. We are working on amendments to our regulations in order to implement what the province is requiring in terms of allowing additional dwelling units. And I know we've spoken about this at past meetings, but we have already drafted that bylaw, and that's going forward to council in the very near future, in the coming months. What we are anticipating is increasing the height from 14.8 feet to about 18 feet, because in discussions with our building department staff, we were trying to determine what is sort of the minimum required to have a garage with a reasonable height and an apartment above. And our current bylaw does not have sufficient room for that, in our opinion. And also, we've looked at other municipalities and what they're implementing as well in the same respect. And so we definitely need to be increasing our height so that we're not seeing minor variances coming in for every carriage house or apartment that's going in a detached building there. So the increase in height is something that staff could support based on where we are going with our new bylaw. I think Bill is requesting a couple of feet probably higher than where we might end up as a township in terms of around the 18 feet.
Yeah.
So I think you're proposing 20 feet, Bill?
Yes, 20 feet.
Again, that's measured height by definition in our bylaw is measured to mid-peak. So midway between the roof and the eave, the roof ridge and the eave, from fixed grade at the center of the front of the building. So that's why I did suggest is if the committee moves forward with this, to put a clause in the heritage permit to council that any changes to the height that are slightly less than what the committee would be looking at, if they need to be, if the committee of adjustment doesn't approve the height, should be included in the heritage permit so that they don't have to come back for anything that's a little bit lower. But also in terms of process, when you have a designated heritage building, it's important for the heritage committee to be satisfied first, or generally satisfied with the direction of the permit before the applicant goes to the committee of adjustment to make the minor variance request. So we always deal with, just like we did on 33 Henderson when there was a rezoning for that old church building, the Heritage Committee would deal with it first because it's a designated property, and then we proceed with the following steps that go towards the other planning approvals necessary. So that's just, so Bill will have to apply for a minor variance application for the height in any case after this heritage permit is dealt with.
Okay, thank you, Mariana. And I think if I could, okay, did someone have, if you have a question, raise your hand, just like, yep, go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to ask then, is it better to save time to vote first on whether the committee is in agreement with recommending to council approval to demolish the building and then go to the next stage? I mean, because if we don't agree to that, there's no point talking about anything else.
Mariana?
Yes, I think first you want to determine whether that's the issue or not, whether the committee would allow the removal of the building. And then you can discuss the heritage permit. And let me just explain again, if the committee decides to allow the demolition, then you move on to the next part, which is allowing the new construction. You could put conditions on the permit in order to deal with it. You could recommend to council that, you know, if you decide to approve it, that it be approved subject to the following conditions. And the conditions could be, you know, that the window, whatever conditions you put on the permit, but some of the ones that we've discussed is the lack of ornamentation. So there was a second revision that came in. So it would be based on, let's say, that revised plan and anything else the committee might feel is appropriate. If you want to ask, you know, for the wood windows or whatever else, the material, and then you could ask for just a final drawing or rendering at the time of whenever, let's just say if the committee, the owners have indicated that they don't want to invest in very detailed drawings until they have a sense of whether the committee would approve it or not. So it could also be subject to the committee approving the final drawing as well. And believe we could do that by email, but I would ask the clerk to confirm that.
Okay, so okay, Nico, go ahead.
I do have some concerns about the demolition.
Okay, could I just interrupt you for a minute? And I'm going to come back to the demolition, Nico.
Okay, good.
And I think I just want to make sure that maybe, if I'm correct here, we would sort of have Bill stay on to listen to the discussion if he wants, but we would then have the discussion about the demolition amongst ourselves. Is that appropriate?
Okay.
Normally, or would we excuse Bill at this point, sort of back to the lobby, or how would that work? Devlin? Okay, yeah, Kerri, do you have any?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, the meetings are open to the public, so
Right.
they are welcome to stay and listen to your deliberations.
Okay.
And if
And
you're comfortable putting a motion on the table first and want to have that discussion, that is totally within your right to have a discussion, to feel the committee members out as to where they are at.
Okay, I suggest, why don't we do that? We'll just have Bill and Suzanne, thank you for being here to answer questions. And we may have another question or two for you. We'll go and have a discussion on the basic issues, and then we can work on a motion if that's where we're going. So thank you. And then, so what I'm suggesting, perhaps we discuss the demolition with the thought that it would be, a carriage house would be built in its place. So the concept then would be initially speaking to the demolition, the concept of the demolition. So go ahead, Nico.
Yeah, the bylaw, I think, speaks to the structure that's under discussion as a shed. Although if you look at it, the sheer length of it would certainly not be reflective of what we might consider as a small shed. There is an association, that building has an association with the church, in that the bylaw indicates that it was mutually shared for this by both the manse and the church for this sharing of wood. So there is this back and forth sharing, but as far as the state of the what's referred to as the shed is concerned, I know that it said that the footings go down 18 inches, but I'm not sure if that is, if the condition of the shed is so irreparable that it absolutely can't be fixed. So those are some of my questions. I think the shed fits contextually with the flavor of the neighborhood. I was actually on site this morning looking at the shed, and it fits quite well within the design of the neighborhood. The garage, I can't quite conceptualize how that would fit because we don't have any renderings, and I think it may be somewhat irregular for us to go ahead and vote on something based on verbal input primarily, rather than having any kind of renderings to look at, which would provide us with some kind of indication as to the profile of the house and the scale of the garage and how they fit together. So those are some of my concerns. I'm happy to hear from the rest of the committee.
Okay, any, Jean? Go ahead, Jean.
The unmute button was. I'm still concerned, I think, a little bit about the heritage attributes of the property. And in reviewing all of the documents that Mariana has provided, the various schedules that that were attached to it. This property is quite spectacular property when I look at it. I would like to do some more investigation into the cultural heritage attributes of the property and whether this is something that we should be preserving because of its history. I would like to see a heritage impact assessment done on the property so that we can look at it and then advise council appropriately as to whether this is a heritage attribute that we should be saving. So I haven't, I mean, I've given my comments on what the design of it, and I've shared them with Mariana. I'm assuming that they were shared with Bill, but I'm not sure that, excuse me, I'm ready to go down the road without further evaluation of the property, the stone shed and the manse and the historical and heritage impact it has on the community.
Okay, anyone have any thoughts on that or questions pertaining directly to the question here in terms of the demolition? Sherry? Unmute. There
Can
you
you hear?
Yep.
Okay. I was just going to ask if Nico, when he was there this morning, if he had any thoughts about the scale sort of where the house is and where this shed is, and if he had any kind of indication, I guess, as to whether a bigger building, higher building would look out of place with the current house that's there now.
Yes, just based on what I saw this morning, the shed seems to provide a link. The sheer length of the shed seems to provide a link between the manse and the church. And I'm not even so sure if there wasn't an opening on both ends of the shed so that it could be shared equally between the church and the manse because of the wood storage that was indicated in the designation profile. Certainly what exists there currently fits perfectly within the scale of not only the property, but with the surroundings as well. Those are some of my observations. The fact that we don't have a rendering, we don't have a scale profile to be able to look at, I think something as large as what's being proposed certainly needs some consideration, and I'm not at all convinced that we should be proceeding on demolition of the shed. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Nico. Does anyone else have any wish to speak to the issue of demolition and or the other issues that have been brought up? Erin, go ahead.
I guess maybe I don't know, maybe playing the devil's advocate a little bit here too. I guess, I mean, I definitely see the value in sort of the secondary structures within our community, and we certainly continue to lose that sort of fabric of those kind of reminiscence of the rural past that I would say Elora and Fergus had with some of the smaller outbuildings. But I think also, and maybe this is a little bit of an exception because we know sort of some of the history of the building particularly, but I think also it's difficult to have an owner, like I think burden an owner with that cost and sort of start setting a precedent to kind of, I don't know, retain buildings that are either too far gone or not suitable for use. And I know we only are looking at the heritage aspect of things and we're not considering infill and intensification and things like that, even though it's hard not to understand those benefits as well. But I don't know. I think that there has to be a balance, and also asking, if we start asking like every homeowner to do an HIA on their properties, it's just, we're starting to burden the homeowners with a lot of cost. And it's sort of, I think, a balance of preserving our heritage resources and in a beneficial way. And I don't want heritage to be a burden to our community ultimately either. So that's my perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Erin, for that. Go ahead, Steve. I recognize Steve.
Thanks, thanks, Phil. Hey, so yeah, it's a difficult decision. One of the things for sure, it's a beautiful heritage little shed. One of the difficulties is, I think that we do always have to look at, for example, you can see in the photo of front elevation detail, image number 3, some of the cracking up in the corner foundations are, my biggest concern is sometimes that you see a demolition because it's completely torn down and we have the Heritage Committee really has no recourse in the future because it fell down. Or that you look at heritage buildings and say, how do we have an input to something that is really bad? And how do we have a little bit of input to what goes back in? So I think that looking at some of the detailed photos, there's some serious foundation cracking. If the foundation pops away, then that's the type of cracking you get. And I've actually repaired a few buildings, and you never get them the same. But anyway, so I think that the Heritage Committee just recommend that if we do recommend demolition, that then now's the time, then you have an opportunity to get some input onto what goes back in as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the gist of what at the beginning of this conversation we were discussing, was that the demolition is linked to the building of a carriage house, which is something that's encouraged within the design guidelines, especially for Elora and Fergus. Highly encouraged apparently from the design guidelines that we have. I'm not sure if they're adopted, but they're certainly in place for us to reference. So, okay, well, thank you for that. Any other, go ahead, Nico.
I wonder if the HIA is not warranted, if we could at least have some further discussion. Would there be a possibility of a site visit so that we can look at the structure ourselves to see if, just so that we can get a really fulsome idea as to the state of deterioration and that kind of thing, rather than voting on everything today?
Okay, that's something that we can put out there as well. I think there's probably some consideration we owe the owners in terms of giving them some indication about, or perhaps they could give us some feedback as to what their plans would be if the shed was not, if we were not to approve the demolition. Perhaps they could give us some indication as to what's likely to happen to the shed in the case of it not being approved for demolition. So that might be a question we'd also want to ask them. It's one thing to insist that we do a heritage impact assessment and so on. I guess I had a question for Mariana on that. Who would pay for that, Mariana? And is that something we've done before?
You can require any information that is reasonable to make the decision. So if the committee feels that a heritage impact assessment is warranted, it's the owner that would pay for that. Okay. The committee could share the costs. We've done it several ways in the past. If the homeowner has difficulty providing a heritage assessment, we have done some research in the past that we've commissioned. So that would be the committee's decision and based on the committee's budget.
Okay. Is that something typically we do very often in terms of the,
No, we haven't, trying to remember, requiring that in the past. We've required a heritage impact assessment in the past when it's been related to consent application. So for severance, for example, the property across the street from this very property was severed several years ago for a new lot, and we required a heritage impact assessment in that case so that we could make the determination of whether severance was appropriate. But in the case of a heritage permit application, I can't recall. I don't know if anyone else on the committee can recall, but I don't recall requiring one.
okay, just to be consistent with our different neighborhoods and communities. That's good information to have. Go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to ask, not being familiar with the scope and breadth of HIA, is there anything on neighboring properties that would give you an indication of what's in the area in terms of impact assessments? Like I understand that, you know, they've been looking at doing HIAs in whole subdivision areas. So I just wondered if there was something close by. So you mentioned across the street. Would that give any indication to the committee that what the scope is in that area, or is it even relevant?
No, it would not be relevant necessarily. Maybe some of the history would be, but as a neighborhood, but in this case, an HIA is tailored to the impacts on a specific property. So what they do is they review the heritage value, and then what would happen is, based on the plans submitted, they would evaluate the impacts to those heritage values and heritage attributes of these specific plans, and then make some recommendations as to whether they are appropriate and mitigation measures. So, you know, what the impacts would be, and then how they could mitigate those impacts. So it would get into detail on this site specifically.
And with regard to this site then, the information that we have about the attributes, there's nothing really specific with the building itself? Is it just more the entire property? So as a committee, if we're trying to isolate this particular building, is there anything that would give us guidance as to what the attributes would be without having to have an HIA done?
So the bylaw itself does not specifically address this building at all, except talking about its history, like in that it served as an additional building between the church and the manse, and was constructed of the stone foundations from the previous church. And then, but it doesn't get into any specific attributes about the shed itself. The property was not designated because of the shed. The property was designated mostly because of the church manse. The shed was described as an additional feature, essentially.
Okay, one more question from Jean then. Just excuse. Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah, Mariana, actually in reading the bylaw, it stated that the manse and accessory buildings, the stone shed, are recognized as heritage attributes. They were both mentioned in the bylaw.
I'm not disputing that. What I said is that it doesn't list any heritage attributes of the shed specifically, but the building, it goes into great detail about the house. So the reason that it was designated was likely for the house, and then the shed was described as one of the sort of additional attributes. But there's no specifics about the shed in terms of its length, its massing, its roof line. Like there are no details. So the bylaw failed to mention any details about the shed specifically.
Nico, one more question.
Yeah, just one more question. Was there not some kind of study done some time ago when was this whole area not being looked at as a heritage district? And was there any literature that went along with looking at that? I thought that there was some literature that was referenced when Pearl came in with its suggestions. Was there not something about this all becoming a heritage district and looking at it at that point?
can answer that. I'm not sure about the Pearl reference, but when several years ago, the neighbors created or studied the area for a Heritage Conservation District, the Victoria Crescent neighborhood. So there would have been, each property was individually researched, and there is information, but I don't have that. I could probably find it, but it's not part of the deliberations of this this application.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think on the question of the heritage impact assessment, is that something then that we would put to the committee as a question at this time to see if that is a direction they would like to go prior to actually discussing the demolition? Go ahead, Erin.
I don't want to keep banging the same drum, but I guess I think maybe the question is sort of, if we did an HIA, how would that serve our decision making? I think in the past we've seen HIAs that we don't necessarily agree with their recommendations either. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And we've talked about HIAs where you know, it is not the opinion, like it's based on historical evidence and a professional assessment, but like we might not agree with what the HIA says. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what further information would that provide to the committee, except for like maybe a professional assessment? And then I don't know, I think it just, to me, seems like we're maybe setting a precedent that for every individual residential property that I don't know, we'll have to start asking for these things, which I think could be costly and onerous. I don't know.
Okay, well, it seems to me then that I'm not sure if this is the appropriate way to go. When we're considering the question of an HIA, would we then see if there is a motion to have an HIA? Would someone want to put that forward? And then we could have that discussion and vote and determine whether or not that's the direction we want to go. To me, that seems to be, at this point, the question's been raised, and I'm not sure how else we want to deal with that. Somebody give me a hand here.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question? I just want some clarification here. What is the committee actually seeking through an HIA? Because
let's ask Jean.
It's quite clear that the property has value. We know what the values are. The question here is whether the building is significant enough to the community that we feel it should be protected and preserved. Is it telling enough of the story in order to put that onus on the owners to keep that property intact and that building intact? So my question is, what is the intention behind the HIA?
Okay,
What's
Jean?
the committee trying to obtain from it?
Jean, could you?
Yep, I'm here. Mariana, you've hit on the point that I was making. It's the importance to the community. How important is it to the community that this be preserved? That was the reason that I was suggesting we do an HIA. So it's for all of us to understand. It's not to put an undue financial pressure on the homeowner, but it is to understand what the importance is. We've heard talks about, or people speaking about the direction of the township to increase the amount of properties or to maximize properties. But that's on one area. What we're talking about here is heritage. We're not talking about anything else. So is this important to the community? That's why I was asking about an HIA. Do we fully understand the importance to the community, to the Victoria Park neighbourhood? Do we understand what it is to them, to our entire community? That was the reason for the HIA. It wasn't something, I wasn't being flippant. I wanted to understand what it means to the community. And I'm not suggesting you thought I was being flippant. I just want to understand, or we should understand fully, what it means to the community, because as a heritage committee, we represent the entire community. That was it.
Okay. Steve? Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I did like the suggestion of having the Heritage Committee going on site. If there's such a reservation towards the building, it's not a bad idea. I'm at this point, I do actually have to leave the meeting, so I just wanted to say goodbye before I headed out. But I look forward to what recommendations the committee comes up with.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you for attending the first part of the meeting. Sherry? Go ahead, Sherry.
Since Bill is still on here, the Zoom, I just wondered if it's worth asking him if the demolition didn't go through, what is he prepared to do with the building? Or is he going to do anything with it? Or is he just going to leave it the way it is?
Okay, go ahead. That's a good question. Bill's here. Bill, do you want to answer that? Did you hear it? Unmute.
Okay. Thanks for getting me involved. The bottom line is I've lived here for almost 20 years. The building, I can't save it. There's not, like, when a foundation is that like close to the surface, no matter how much money I put into it, it'll keep cracking. So my intention is long-term, that I want to live here as long as I can. If I take the shed down and build a coach house, I have income in that coach house. If not, there will be a point where I have to sell the house, and I guarantee that the next person is going to build a lot like a house on the second lot. So my plan is to respect heritage and put that coach house as part of the heritage of this house, because I believe one of the flaws is that with a big lot, people slice them off and put houses on them, and it really screws up the building. So lose the shed, build the coach house, and now no one can build on the second lot. That's because across the road, that was really unfortunate. Unfortunately, I mean, fortunately, the people who live there are excellent people. I really like them, but the building is not at all in keeping with the area. So I'm trying my best to make the coach house look in keeping with the area. The shed, it's not salvageable. I knew that right from the start. Every corner has a crack through it.
Okay, thank you, Bill. So I think we probably need to move forward towards some sort of resolution to at least the questions that we have right now. So is anyone prepared to make a motion that HIA be done? If not, then let's put that aside and discuss the demolition of the coach house. And if, yeah, go ahead, Nancy. Unmute.
There you go. I was just going to say then, if the building's not salvageable, just speaking from a risk perspective, it becomes a liability to the public then if somebody comes on their property, or if the building were to crumble, or if it's not salvageable, then what are the options if you don't demolish it? Because if it's just there and continues to crumble, what is its value going to remain if it can't be salvaged?
Yeah. Are you asking Bill to answer that, or is that an...
I'm just asking. I'm not sure who has that information.
Yeah. I think Bill's indicated that the reason he can't save the building, he just said that, and that he wants to do something for the whole property so the property can't be severed at some point into two lots, which it apparently is at this point. So, yeah. Does that answer your question, Nancy? Yeah, okay. So Nico?
I was just going to say though, so if the committee says no, and I'm not saying one way or the other, I'm just trying to understand the entire risk element here. If the committee says no, we don't agree it should be demolished and replaced, or even just starting with the demolition, then it just sits and rots. So what value is that to the community if it's of value, if it truly can't be repaired?
I think that's the question we always come across when it comes to heritage properties. Are they going to be of any use, even if we designate them or we don't allow them to be demolished? Then what happens to them? I think Bill's indicated he can't save it. Bill, do you have an answer? What you'll do with the shed?
Yeah, I can't save it, so it's going to come down. It's not worth me putting any money into it.
Okay, thank you. Nico?
So my question's directed to Bill. So Bill, one of the things I was hearing was that if it's demolished, if the shed is demolished, that you would salvage the material to put back into the proposed coach house?
I would use some.
You're muted. There you go.
Okay, I would use some of it for the foundation. Now, since there was an original church in between this house and the church, and the stone went to two other buildings, and then that coach house got the rubble. So the stone is very small, but I would use it in the foundation. And if Brian Neeson would take it, then I would give it to him. And he's the gentleman who restores. He did the Elora Mill, and he does a lot of the old buildings. But he's the one who's going to do the brick on the coach house and the stone on the bottom. And he didn't want it. So it's pretty small stuff.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Perhaps what we could do then is get an idea of, at this point, just go around and each one of us indicate whether they're in favor of the demolition in order to replace the property with a carriage house, or the building with a carriage house, sorry. And if you are in favor of the demolition, okay. If not, then perhaps indicate what you would like to, or what you would need in order to help the process proceed. Is that fair in terms of? Yeah, okay. So Nico, perhaps we could start with you then.
I had proposed a site visit, and so I think it would behoove the committee to have a look at the structure, and if we can get some kind of an indication, perhaps not formal renderings, but through the drawings, to see just what kind of impact the scale of the proposed building would the impact it would have on its surroundings. I think if we were actually on site, it would give us a little bit of a better perspective.
Okay, Erin?
I don't have any major issues with the demolition. I think, as the owner has indicated, it's in poor condition. And I think to some of Nancy's points, it's sort of what's the value in a crumbling building to the community and in terms of its use. I would maybe request that as part of the demolition, the owner takes kind of archival photographs just so that there's a record of the building and that could be submitted to the archives.
Okay, and Sherry?
Yeah, I am not against the demolition. I would rather see it being used, the building. rather than it crumble and not be salvaged at all. So as long as Bill is willing to do some of the, like we mentioned, like Erin mentioned, take some of those stone or bricks that are there and can use them again, I would appreciate that. And I think that's really thoughtful of him to do that. And so I'm not against the demolition.
Thank you. And I should say we're just sort of trying to get an idea of what the committee is thinking at this point. There isn't actually a formal motion on the table. So we're just going around to see where we're at, if that's okay. Go ahead, Jean.
Well, I would like to understand a little bit more of the background to it, but I think I'm with Nico in looking at the doing a site visit, having a look at what is being proposed. I agree with Erin, if there is no other alternative, that it should be documented. There is a process for doing that the buildings, the location, etc., should be documented, and that should be kept.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Nancy?
Based on the information provided in terms of the building itself not being salvageable in its current form, I don't have any concerns with regard to the demolition. And in keeping with other people's comments in terms of the materials itself and documentation, I think there should also be the caveat that the building replacement, because it's quite, I was just looking at square footage, it's almost double, is it, size? So to Nico and Jean's point about how is it going to fit within the scale and the scope of the property. So the caveat should be that, you know, the building itself is subject to, and I don't know, Mariana, I think you mentioned something earlier, subject to, you know, the bylaws and the building codes and stuff like that, but also keeping in mind that the committee has a concern with regard to the look of the property and keeping with that.
Yeah, okay, and I at this point, I think I can, thank you, Nancy. I think I can also support the idea of the demolition of the structure. I have actually seen it as well. And, but I can see that, you know, that's a valid comment on the site visit. But I think perhaps what we could do is to give the owners some certainty and some result from this meeting is agree that we could, in principle anyway, put forward a permit which allowed for the demolition of the building. Given, would it be appropriate, Mariana? Could you sort of help me summarize where we're at then, if we're able to support demolition in order to build a carriage house? Are we able to add enough caveats to it in order to satisfy the need for a review of the design and the scope and scale of the new property?
I think that if you're in agreement on the demolition with the conditions that you've mentioned about documentation, photo documentation and such with the archives, and understand the value of the property, then the second stage would be you want to provide input definitely on the new design. If the committee feels there's not enough information today to make that second part of that decision and wants to do a site visit to understand the context better in order to make a decision on the second part of the permit in terms of the new building, and reviewing our design guidelines and reviewing what's going in, then we could defer to the next meeting, arrange for a site visit in the interim, and answer any questions that we had, that the committee had on the new build, and deal with it at the August meeting. It would still get it to council within the allowable time frame. That's sort of one option. Or if the committee feels there's enough information today to allow the demolition and then put on some conditions on the permit without a site visit, that's the second option. I'm not sure which way the committee wants to go or if there's enough information on that today. But as I said before, you could put conditions on the permit to say that it's in general keeping with the drawings that have been submitted, subject to, and you can discuss the materials, the height, the brickwork, the design.
Okay.
There was just question about scale, so I'm not sure if though that question about scale has been answered.
Yeah, I think the only way to answer the question of scale would be to see some sort of rendering, which is, I think a valid and it's a tough question. I mean, that we're looking at here. So I think to summarize it, then we have either delay the permit and subject to a site visit, and receiving some sort of rendering. But within, I think we could probably give an indication to, we should be able to give an indication to Bill and Susan at this point that the demolition, as to the nature and the state of the demolition. So, Nancy?
This still has to be approved by council though, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And if we don't, if I'm correct, if we weren't to recommend it, they could still go to council to get their demolition, right? So, yeah, I'm okay. I see you, Bill. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
So the question I have is that the garage is 20 feet tall at the moment. The house is 34 feet. That's 14 feet difference. So the scale issue, it's 14 feet taller. I don't understand why we're dwelling on that, because it is substantially taller, the house to the garage.
Okay. Mariana?
Just to help with that discussion about scale, so the garage is set back. The property, as you know, is curved where the house projects quite a significant distance to the front. This garage is visible on the left if you're facing the house, so it's on the left side and sort of around a bend in the road. It is quite prominent on the street on that side. But to help distinguish, we talk about heritage principles. So we talk about legibility, materials. So we definitely want the house to be, the new building to be distinct and to recognize that it is different, but of its time. So we don't want to blur the lines between what's old and what's new. It clearly should look new, even though it should fit in generally with the neighborhood and the street. But also in terms of the massing, Bill, could you, so the house itself is a full 2 stories plus roof, Georgian style. So we know it's 34 feet high to the mid peak, which is even taller than to the actual roof ridge. I know it does have chimneys, significant chimneys that are taller than that as well. So the other question is, what is the mass of the house in terms of, let's say, square footage, so people can understand the total volume of the building in terms of square feet as compared to what you're proposing for the second building, the garage. So if you could do maybe just a comparison, that might help the committee to understand the difference. Because at the end of the day, with regard to massing, this building should be not only subordinate to the main house, but also in the context of the streetscape, it should not overwhelm the streetscape. So could you also maybe just speak to, you've already spoken to the building at the back, which is the very large church. So in the context of that very large church, this building will appear much smaller, but there is, I think, one house adjacent further west. Could you just speak to that house and how this garage would compare to that house to the west?
Okay, the house, our house is 30 by 40, so 1,200 square feet per floor. This garage is going to be, the plan is, it's about 37 feet wide by 27 feet deep, so 900 square feet per floor. Actually, yeah, 900 and something square feet per floor. So it's smaller, but not substantially smaller than the house. The house to the left of it is a small house, but it has a whole bunch of additions onto that house. And I think that it is bigger, the footprint, the house to the garage. If that's what you want to know. The tricky part is I was trying my best to make the garage as small as possible, but when you have living space above the garage and you have one bedroom and a den, a bathroom, and a living room, and a staircase going down, you've hit that number. Like, it's hard to get smaller and make it useful, like a 2-bay garage. So that's why it's a hybrid, really. It's a garage and a room above it, which makes it, I had to stretch it. I was trying my best to make it smaller, but that's the best we can do to make it warrant a substantial room above the garage.
Go ahead, Mariana. Did you have a?
Sorry, I just didn't know if Sue.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
sorry,
wanted to add
if I may add, and we really appreciate the opportunity to hear this conversation and really respect everybody's desire to maintain heritage. I just want to say that I don't know if you know, Bill is so committed to heritage, and he's actually contacted regularly by the Hamilton Heritage Board to do work in Hamilton, to consult about properties there. And so, you know, it's not as though he's a lay guy off the street who says, I want to make a lot of money. He is so committed to heritage to the point where I tease him that he'd take our bathrooms out because they're not original. So I just wanted to put that point forward. I'm not sure if you're knowing of that. But I guess the other thing where what I noticed was that, you know, across the road there was a severed lot and a large home was put up, which I would call Whistler style, you know, ski chalet style. Beside that was Jean's home. I'm not sure of her last name. Tiny little beautiful cottage. The people renovated with a really modern addition that's probably 3 times the size of the original cottage. And so, you know, when Bill and I were talking about this, I was saying, okay, well, obviously there's some leniency on how we're going to do it. But Bill always said, okay, we need to keep it in keeping with the neighborhood, with heritage. And we've really tried hard to do that. I appreciate the drawings don't reflect that necessarily, but as I said, it's COVID. You know, we wanted to get this process going, but, you know, I assure you that the intention is to create a home where people walk by. People already walk by our home and take pictures of our home and say, this is spectacular. We don't want to change that, right? We don't want to create an awful building. The site visit, all of you are more than welcome to come anytime that you'd like. Absolutely let us know and we'll tour you through. But Bill's also a very respected builder. And trust me, if it were salvageable, he would absolutely salvage it. So I just wanted to put that out there. These are sort of the thoughts that were coming up, and I just wanted to share those. But I appreciate your allowing us to sit in on the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susan. And okay, I think we have to look at the time a little bit here. We're 1:20 into this meeting. So rather than, we could probably talk about it for another hour or so, but I think we've got enough information. I should also point out that, Susan, that we did give, that this committee actually did give Bill an award.
I know,
So,
I was there, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we understand his commitment to heritage. So I would suggest that we have enough information that we should go ahead and perhaps vote on the question of the permit, the demolition, and then with, as Mariana summarized, then if we could have some sort of a motion to, or is that necessary? What exactly do we need in terms of voting here, Mariana?
I would defer to the clerk on that, but I think
Okay, I don't
if
see
you
him.
could take it in, I think Kerri's still on.
Okay,
If you
Kerri's
can,
great.
if you want to take it in two parts, you could decide on the demolition today and ask for further information and a site visit on the second part, and we can do that, deal with that at the August meeting. That might be like give you some timelines to move forward and still get it to council. I'm not sure if we have a meeting of council in August, but I would defer to Kerri on that as well. And then can ask if that's the committee's, if the committee's comfortable with that and not comfortable with issuing an actual permit on the new build.
Okay,
Yet.
if we did a demolition permit though, then there might not be anything to visit.
No, it doesn't work that way.
No, okay.
Because so it would, they have to go hand in hand, as I said. So
Okay,
the bylaw, yeah, the request is to demolish and to reconstruct building in its place. They don't have to happen at the same time, but I think the owners would want some comfort in knowing that. And again, they need other planning approvals to go forward anyway. So the new building is by no means approved yet anyway. But I think if you take it in the two steps, then we can at least keep it moving forward. And there's a decision point being made today, and then maybe a decision point being made in August.
I'm just wondering, is there a point of having a site visit if we approve the demolition at the same time, or can we rescind the demolition after a site visit?
I think the site, yeah, it's up to you again, how you want to proceed. But I think the site visit was also to understand the massing and context, okay. I thought. But okay. If it was just to determine the state of the building for demolition purposes, then the decision could be deferred as well, I think, to the August meeting. But I would ask the clerk to confirm that.
All right. So Kerri, could you perhaps give us a question that allowed for it to approve the demolition of the building, and that the committee would, and then we would follow up with a site visit, and also perhaps at that point we could also get some sort of rendering of a more complete, detailed coach house in place on the property with some perspectives on the main house.
Okay, that is definitely doable. So then I think, like Mariana had indicated, we would just sort of do it in two parts. So
okay.
I would suggest that you get a mover and a seconder to approve the demolition, subject to the conditions that you have discussed, that being archival photo.
Oh yeah, yes, okay.
Commemoration, right. Or whatever you call that.
Right.
I believe that was the only condition I heard.
Okay.
So
and then where would the site visit and the renderings for the future? Then we would work on that additional information, Mariana, and for the next part, for the actual heritage permit to build.
Yes, I could get you that additional information, whatever was requested.
Okay.
And I think we should do it as in a form of a resolution. So if we deal with the demolition part, subject to the conditions, moved, seconded, let's assume
okay.
agreed, then you can move on to defer the second part of the approval process in order
okay.
to do the site visit and review drawings, some form of rendering that will give you the impact and scale on the neighborhood.
Okay.
Could I suggest one more condition though, for if you're proceeding with demolition, is to reuse as much of the stone as possible? I know Bill has indicated that, and I think the committee would want to see that. So as much of the stone as possible in the new building, or to provide it to somebody who could potentially reuse it if if there's anyone interested in that.
Okay. So Kerri, can you read then the motion, or do you want someone to read the motion?
Oh, I don't have anything planned, but what the gist of it will be
Have
is
we lost Devlin? Like normally Devlin would write this down for us, so I'm a little, you want me to write it down?
oh no, as
Yeah.
long as you trust that I will write it up according to what I have indicated. If I
All right, so I can, what did I say?
yeah, it would be a motion to approve the demolition subject to the following conditions: that archival commemorative photos be taken, and that the stone be reused, as much of the stone be used as possible, or donated for reuse as possible. We will certainly write it up a little better than that, but
well, I think I've got it more or less here. So the resolution, it's in the form of a resolution you're suggesting? A
Yes.
resolution to approve the demolition of the property of the stone shed, subject to archival commemoration with photos, and also that the rubble stone that was removed from the shed be reused in the new construction, and or donated for uses in other parts of the community. So do we have a seconder to that motion, and then we can discuss it? Sherry, okay, second it. Okay, so discussion, Nico?
Yeah, don't we also then have to have a de-designation discussion? Does that have to be included in the proposed motion, that it be de-designated first, and then we look at the demolition?
Mariana?
I will have to confirm that, but I'm sure that it's just I'm pretty sure that it's a update to the designation bylaw, because you're not demolishing the entire, all the structures on the property. So you're not repealing the bylaw just for the purposes of demolition, which would be a standard practice if everything was being demolished. You're actually just modifying the bylaw. So we will have to rewrite the bylaw, but that, the preference is that it's rewritten after the new construction and re-registered, because then it could reflect also the new construction that's on the property. So it would essentially say in the list of heritage attributes that the shed has been removed due to poor structural condition, it has been archived, and it has been replaced with this new building that is not included in the designation bylaw. So that's the way it would be rewritten. And then that has to be, the notice has to be reissued, basically. There's a process for revising a designation bylaw under the Heritage Act. But that could come later. So what we could do is, as part of the discussion in August, is add that as part of the resolution, and that the the designation bylaw be updated.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions to the motion at this time? Okay, Nico?
I would like to see the motion deferred to the next meeting, and that we have the site visit and then vote on not only the demolition, but also the proposed reconstruction. We look at them simultaneously.
Okay, Kerri?
Yeah, through you, if that is a motion to defer, you must deal with the motion to defer before you can deal with the main motion. So
Okay.
you can get a seconder to defer, then
Right.
let's deal with that first.
Okay, so do we have a seconder to defer the motion that we're discussing to the next meeting? Jean? Okay, so we now have a motion on the floor to defer the motion to demolish. And so let's go around and are there any questions? Do we just deal directly with that, Kerri, or do we actually have questions on that?
No, a motion to defer is not debatable, so you
Okay.
just call the vote.
Okay, so we'll start with Nico. Obviously, you're in
Yes.
favor.
Yes.
Okay. Erin,
Not in favor.
Sherry, thank you. Unmute.
Not in favor.
Okay. Jean. Unmute.
In favor?
Okay. Nancy.
Not in favor.
Okay. And not in favor. So the results of that motion to defer are
Defeated.
defeated. Yes, thank you.
Defeated.
I'm having two. Yes, so we're back to the original motion then, which is a resolution to allow the demolition with the archival commemoration photos and the reuse of the rubble stone. Okay, so any questions to that motion? Kerri?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I just ask who actually moved that? Did you move it, Mr. Chairman, or?
No, you mean the original, the motion?
Yes, I have Sherry on as the seconder.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, can I move that then?
You can do, you're as the chair, you can.
Whatever I want?
Yeah.
Okay,
no,
is there anyone who would like to move that motion that to the resolution to demolish? If not, I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, so now perhaps we can go around and have if there is no discussion on it, then we can just do the vote. Maybe I'll start with Nancy. Okay.
Yes, I'm in favor.
Okay, you're in favor of the motion. Jean?
Against?
Okay. Nico?
Yeah, I'll vote against at this point.
Okay. Erin?
Yeah, in favor.
Sherry?
In favor.
Favor, thank you. Okay, and I'll vote in favor. Okay, so that motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody. That was quite a discussion, probably a record for me. I appreciate your input. I appreciate Bill and Suzanne for being here to discuss it in depth. And I think we've still agreed on a site visit, which can be arranged, and we will we'll schedule. And also the additional issues that need to be taken up in terms of, sorry, Kerri, go ahead. Yep. Mute.
Sorry, I think you've agreed to that, but I think it should be a resolution that you're.
Resolution, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so the additional information in terms of a site visit and additional renderings we'll work on for the next meeting, where we can discuss the actual design of the carriage house. Is everybody, we're all on the same page now where we're at with this issue? And I think that completes the discussion. Mariana? Yep, okay. I don't, my agenda here is disappeared. Just a minute.
Thank you very much for your consideration. I have to go now. So
That's fine. Okay, thanks very much, everybody, on that one, Bill, and we'll say goodbye to Bill and Suzanne.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, Mariana will be in touch with you concerning the additional information for the next meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so we're on agenda item.
No, I don't think we actually got a resolution for the deferral. I just need a mover and a seconder and then an all in favor.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so we need a resolution then to defer the remainder of the heritage permit. Is that it to the next meeting?
Yeah, what's the verbiage, Mariana? What's the second part?
And that the heritage, you could say that the balance of the heritage permit regarding the new construction of an accessory building be deferred and is there an August council meeting and committee meeting? Okay. So be deferred to the next meeting, we could say.
Okay.
Okay. So all in, we need a mover and a seconder for that.
Yeah.
Sherry, do you move that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Seconder, Nancy, I see you raised your hand. Okay, all in favor of that resolution then? We can just do raise of hands, I think, on this one. Okay, that's Sherry. And against? Okay, so somewhat awkward, but I believe everybody voted in favor there. Nico, I just didn't see, yeah, you were, okay. So unanimous on the remainder of that. I apologize, folks. I'm still kind of struggling with doing Zoom meetings. So I know it's taken a long time to work through this, but anyway, I think it's important. We had a good discussion. We can move on. Does anybody want to take a break? Just a couple minutes, if need be. If not, we can move on to 6.2. Which is the heritage permit application for 7224 Sideroad 10 Pilkington, designated heritage property. And
Okay, I will just bring in the, I think there's just one applicant for this one, I think. Yes, just one. Hold on just a moment. I think this gentleman's name is Tony, if I'm not mistaken, Mariana.
Yes, that's correct. He did indicate that the owner and maybe the contractor wanted to attend, and I think they were sent the invite, but I'm not sure if they're attending.
Okay, because I think I have 3 waiting for the next for Chalmers, but I don't think I have anyone else here. Maybe Tony can indicate whether he's the only one joining us.
Hi, it's Tony here. Yes, Annie Tobias, who is the owner, is I think in the waiting room.
Okay, okay, fair enough. I will bring.
As well as representatives from Evolve Builders. That's Ben, Polly, and Michael Renaud.
Okay, I will bring in Michael then too.
okay, welcome, Tony, Annie, and Michael. We're just about to deal with then the heritage permit application for your property, and I'm going to ask Mariana just to give us a brief summary then of the application that you've brought.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Chair. This application for 7224 Sideroad 10 is in the former Pilkington Township. It's a designated property, former schoolhouse, and the application is for, as per the circulated plans, removal of a second-story balcony, which is on one side of the property. So if you are looking at it from the street, it's on the right side, or I believe east. So it is removal of the balcony and reinstating that dormer to sort of reconstruct and reclad it, and then a second dormer to mirror that dormer on the other side of the roof in the same location, and also at the back, the rear facade of the building is to open up the building with some new door openings so that they can extend back into the rear yard and into the garden area with, I believe, a deck, and a third installation of a new doorway on the west side of the building, or the left side towards the rear, to access a basement. We did receive the application several months ago and had discussed it on a preliminary basis. So provided some of the feedback that we received from the committee to the applicants. And I know they have made, they've provided some additional drawings and additional information to address some of the comments and concerns raised. And I think primarily those concerns were the overhangs on the dormers in terms of water penetration, and the discussion of the dormers themselves in terms of whether the second dormer was appropriate, and whether it might be better to do one long dormer on the existing side where the existing dormer is, or to put in that second dormer. And I know you've provided some additional information, so that is the extent of the application before us, and I don't, feel free to add if there was anything missed.
Okay. Okay, so what I thought we could do, Tony, perhaps you would like to speak to that then?
For sure. Just everybody can hear me, okay? Okay, great. Well, thank you to the committee for considering this application. We've appreciated your comments, and I've been kind of looking forward to this discussion. One thing I would say is that the owner, Annie, who's on the call right now with us, has, I think she's put together a team of people, myself included, and Ben and Michael from Evolve Builders, who all really love and respect this building. It just takes a matter of visiting the site to see that it really has a lot of fantastic character, and that we're, I just wanted to underline that we're really interested in working in a respectful way with the structure. It's been a single family house for quite some time now, and I understand that the existing dormer was built in the 1970s. For sure, we're looking to kind of minimize the impact that that one is having by removing the balcony. And what we're hoping to do with this, the second floor, if I can just speak to the idea of the second dormer, is just a modest increase in the floor space for an existing, call it loft or 1.5 story space. Definitely the thinking is that we're designing something that can be subordinate to the character of the existing schoolhouse. We're not looking to interrupt any of the fascia or the eaves line, to kind of keep that back and minimize it as much as possible from the street. We did look at some different options. We kind of settled on the idea of twinning the dormer, just to add that idea of balance back to the building, because the existing dormer is kind of lopsided, especially in the way that it overhangs with the balcony. So we received your comments that questioning whether that was an appropriate move. And I know that normally the interiors of a building wouldn't be under consideration, but in our thinking, the second dormer, as we've proposed it, maybe works a little bit more sensitively with the heavy timber structure that's interior to the building, in that we're removing fewer elements that are actually visible from the interior. So I hope that you could take that under consideration, and we're happy to answer questions about that. If you want me to walk you through the document that was sent, we've got a few figures, some photographs, but you just let me know. I know that as far as time, I don't want to take up more time than necessary. So I'll let you direct me on that.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I don't want to cut you off there.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah, no, there were a couple other comments about materials, and I just wanted to underline that we're willing to listen to any suggestions. We've made some proposals, have some ideas in mind, but we're open to your feedback, and would of course look to work with the Heritage Committee as far as finding the best route forward.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much on that. If there are no other comments from your delegation, then perhaps I can just open the floor up to questions from the committee for Tony or any of the other members of the delegation that you may have. Erin?
Thank you for the explanation. I was the one who commented on the the dormers, but I think the explanation of sort of those interior features is helpful, that you don't want to interrupt that feature. So those are original timbers, is that correct?
Yes, they are original heavy timber structure. It's kind of interesting. Definitely in the space.
And then I guess my only other question is receiving, sorry, I'm looking at receiving the updated information that shows sort of the 3D diagram on page, I think, 5 of the document. So it looks like the entry to the basement has changed from the original elevation dated June 22nd. So I guess my read on the original elevation is that the stairs were going parallel to the building, and then now it looks like they're meeting perpendicular. Is that?
Yeah, that was a suggestion from Michael and Ben from Evolve Builders, just as far as constructability. Also, there's an existing well that we need to maintain a setback to. So I'm happy to update the application drawings. I know that that was a kind of a late change, but that was a part of the site meeting and discussion from last week.
Yeah, it's just, I wasn't sure which one would take precedence, or yeah, thank you.
Okay, anyone else have any questions for Tony? Or I know, Jean, you had alluded to the materials being removed from the back of the structure.
I'm just looking at my notes. Simply that the brick should match. Actually, in reading Tony's response, no, I'm happy with what's been.
Okay.
And sort of just, Tony, thank you for your response. It was excellent. It really clarified lots of points for me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. If there are no other questions for Tony and the other two, then perhaps we could just go straight into deliberating on the heritage permit application. And if we are seemingly satisfied with the questions that have been answered, then I'm wondering if we could have someone move to accept this, that we would recommend the permit, the heritage permit. And does that have to go to council as well, Mariana?
Yes, that's right. So it would be our recommendation for approval of the heritage permit.
Okay, so that's, if someone could move that. It looks like Nancy, you're willing to move that. And I see Jean, would you be the seconder? Okay. So we can have a discussion that the heritage permit as a recommendation go to council. And perhaps I could just, if you want to, you could make a comment and also include whether you're for or against this application, starting with Nico.
I'm for the approval, and would like to thank Tony and his team for their excellent work on this. Thank you.
Erin?
Yeah, I have no objections and approve the permit.
Okay, Sherry?
I have no objections and appreciate the quality of work that they're doing as well.
Thank you. Jean?
Yeah, I have no objections. I'm for it.
Okay, and Nancy?
I have no objections either. I think it looks stunning, actually, what they're planning to do to keep in character. So congrats on that.
Okay, and I also am in for the application. And yeah, I thank you for your detailed responses. It was very helpful to the committee.
Well, thank you for considering it.
Okay, and I think what that means is the motion passed. So yeah. Okay, well that one went fairly quickly. So is there any follow-up that we would be looking for, Mariana?
So I, just for the benefit of the applicants, I will be taking a report to council regarding that heritage permit on, I believe it's the July 27th meeting with the Heritage Committee's recommendation. And then I will advise you on about the decision. You could register if you'd like, but it's not necessary given the Heritage Committee's recommendation. It's typically more of a routine matter. And you can also watch that meeting online, and I'll send you information.
Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank the council for the review and thank Tony and the team. But I want to tell you, July 27th is my birthday. So I will keep my fingers crossed.
Okay. Well, happy birthday. Okay, thanks very much. And we can move on to the final item then and say goodbye to. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you. Well, my agenda keeps popping in and out here, but I believe the demolition of the detached garage only at 167 Chalmers Street in Elora. It's a listed property, not a designated property. So essentially we are just going to review the state of the old shed, and also I don't think there was many questions raised during the email that Mariana sent out. So at this point, Nancy, you have a
Are they
question?
putting forward, there was drawings of another detached garage. Are they putting forward recommendations for that garage?
Sorry, go ahead, Mariana.
So yeah, I should just maybe clarify a little bit. So because this property is listed, the only decision being asked of the committee is with regards to demolition of the building on a listed property. So it requires a 60-day notice of intent to demolish, which the owner has provided, and requires basically for council to be notified. So we would take that to council or let that time lapse. Really, there's no decision point that has to be made. The only requirement under the Heritage Act is that the owner notify the township. If there are no objections, then there would be no concerns. And in addition, what happens is they've provided that additional information just to show us what they're proposing to build in its place, but the committee doesn't have any decision-making requirement at this point because it's not designated. So that would just need to meet zoning and our urban design guidelines for infill development. But they have provided that for information so that the committee is aware of what might be replacing that building.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have welcomed Angela and her partner there to the meeting. Yeah, hi. Thank you for joining us. And were there any specific questions then for Angela on the demolition? Okay, if not, then what is required? Do we need again, a motion to demolish? And this motion doesn't have to go to council, right? Mariana?
In this case, if the committee is okay with it, it wouldn't, we would just let it lapse just because of the current emergency situation. We're taking things to council that only require an actual decision.
Okay, so you.
Yeah, so it would, if the Heritage Committee is okay with it, similar to the one on Colburn several months ago, then we would just allow that 60-day time period to lapse, and then they could apply for their permit if there are no objections.
Okay, do we need a motion to that effect?
Yes, so if the committee could make a motion that there are no objections to the demolition of the shed only at the property.
Okay, so then the motion would be that the committee has no objection to the demolition of the property at 167 Chalmers, not the property, sorry, to the garage, detached garage, as referenced in the drawings at 167 Chalmers Street. And we have someone who would make that motion. Nico, and seconder, Erin. Okay, and I think we can just do this by is it okay to do this just by a show of hands? All in favor? Okay, and that motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, Angela. I apologize for how long it took us to get to your request, but thank you for attending the meeting and being here. And I believe if you have any further questions, then Mariana, they'll be issuing the permit and so on subsequent to this.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, that brings us to the point where perhaps we should, it's a 2-hour meeting, is that correct? Do we need to extend the meeting to have our discussion or no? No? Okay. So,
Yeah, I would like to say that we defer, given the time that it is now, we defer that the council update until another meeting.
okay, thank you. Thank you for putting that on the floor then. So that was an agenda item, and do we need to vote on that? No? Okay. If everybody's okay with that, I think we probably, we've gone through that enough. Or we've had enough discussion for tonight on that. And we'll add that to the next agenda. Is that what you're requesting in the deferral, Jean? Yeah.
That would be good.
Yep. And then concerning the next meeting, can we be advised on that, how that'll happen, Mariana? The timing for the next meeting?
I'm not sure. I wonder if Devlin or Kerri could indicate.
I have it scheduled for the 11th of August is on the regular schedule. Is that still doable?
Nancy?
I was just curious, was there a reason why today was moved from evening? I just, it's just hard for people that work, and I have commitments on Tuesdays during the day. So not always, I can try and swing it, but I was just curious, was there a reason? Is it because of the pandemic that it makes it easier to have in the afternoon, or what was the reason today to change the time?
I just went along with the request, but perhaps someone else, Mariana, do you have any background on that?
I think it was suggested by the clerks that it would be easier if it was during an afternoon meeting, but I'm not sure if.
Yeah, we can certainly do evening meetings. We're trying to keep our costs down and overtime to a minimum. So any meetings that we can have during the day, we don't incur any overtime costs, and it's just part of our regular duties. So where we can, we're trying to keep the cost to the taxpayer down.
I think we're probably just barely at our quorum, because I know Don is working, and who else are we? Are we missing one other? Anyway, Don probably can't make it.
Nanette.
And Nanette, yeah, they're both working. I'm sorry, Nanette. Yeah, so we'll probably have to look at getting back to our regular time. So thanks for that input there, Nancy. Okay, well, stand by for a meeting update, I guess, for August 11th. We'll look at that. And thanks very much, everybody. I really appreciate you showing up and putting in your comments and being part of the meeting.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
See you later.
Bye.